What is menopause? Typical timeline, typical signs and symptoms, and what is it?
Kristen, I'll take the kind of technical and then you can kind of speak about the senescence. But so menopause is literally one day in the life of a woman, and it's that day that she's gone 12 months without a menstrual cycle, without a period. Okay. The years leading up to that, where we start to feel those changes, whether it's changes in sleep, mood, sometimes changes in the menstrual cycle, not always, weight, like many, many different symptoms. List is very long, but, hot flashes, or not, never had those myself. That's perimenopause. And that is, I've heard people say it can be as long as 12 years, as short as 4. I think it's probably not quite 12 years. But, it's just, let's say, the years leading up to that one day. And then every day after menopause, that one day we've achieved without 12 months without a cycle, is considered postmenopause. I was actually corrected by someone on social media who said, no, it's not postmenopausal because that assumes that you've gotten past menopause. And I just did a facepalm and said, I'm not replying to that comment.
Yes, because you have gotten past menopause. Yeah. Yeah. So, the interesting thing is there's so much focus on this one day in time of menopause being tied to the menstrual cycle that a lot of women associate menopause with sort of this end of fertility and end of cycling. And this is one of the biggest myths that we think has absolutely been the biggest disservice to women. It has, yes, that's something that happens along with it. But what's really happening here is we have this ovarian senescence. It's part of typical aging. It can happen prematurely. It can happen because of other events, whether it's surgical or pharmaceutical induced or whatever. But essentially what's happening is it is the loss of our female hormone production from the ovaries. It's the decoupling of the brain and the ovaries. They're no longer kind of signaling appropriate to each other. So we're losing an endocrine cycle. And we want women to think about it that way instead of just losing a bleeding cycle or a menstrual cycle or a fertility cycle. Because in the loss of this endocrine cycle, what we're losing are all the genomic signals that these sex hormones provided us throughout our lifetime. And so when women are told it's really just the end of fertility and end of menstruation, they're misled about what the imperatives really are beyond a hot flash or a foggy brain or disrupted sleep. And that's the piece of menopause that most women do not understand and no doctor is really telling them about. So it really is the loss of this endocrine cycle due to aging. In most instances, it's perfectly normal. We're living a lot longer than we used to. But if we all paid attention to how are we living longer, it's not all that healthy, right? So we would say menopause is really the beginning of an abrupt change in our health span. And that's what we want women to kind of focus on.
Very interesting. This disruption in the cycle or this hormone loss, what are the key players here? Because when I think about female hormones at a base level, I think estrogen and progesterone. How intricately, delicately balanced are these? And what happens when you just kind of end that story? Is that the shift that's happening? And what does that cause in the experience of the female body?
Yeah, they're rarely actually balanced, okay? And we can kind of include, Steve, I'm not sure if you've heard the term estrogen dominance. It's really not a thing like people think it's a thing, which is like overproducers of estrogen. So in a normal menstrual cycle, we are we have progesterone that comes in on day 14, right? And so we don't really have much progesterone in the first 2 weeks of the cycle. But so when we are, say, in decline, what happens is progesterone will drop first. It's almost always the first hormone to drop. And then estrogen is dropping as well. It doesn't feel like it in the beginning, usually because it's erratic. And that's because that brain to ovarian loop, the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis is becoming dysregulated, but it's not completely offline. So the brain is going to send a message to the ovaries, make estrogen, make estradiol. I need to correct myself. It's estradiol. And the ovaries will make it. And then it'll be like this month where it's high estrogen. Many cases progesterone has already dropped. But what people don't realize, what women don't realize is, we'll speak to like 52-year-old to be like, I'm estrogen dominant. And what we usually say is, well, maybe for 1 month you were, but you have to understand that these hormones are both on the way down. So progesterone goes first, then estrogen follows, just at a different kind of a pattern.
Yeah. And there's a big movement right now to talk about how testosterone is in more abundance than estrogen in the female body. And it's a difference in measuring units and all these things. And okay, that's fine, but it's really about androgens. All sex hormones really kind of start at this base level, and we have androgens, particularly DHEA, and then we, metabolize things and convert. And what women need to understand is that testosterone, even if it's an abundant level, is not staying testosterone in its entirety. Much of it is aromatizing into estrogen. That's how we get this thing. So, if we were predominantly needing our testosterone, we'd all be men, right? And that's what differentiates you and me, is that really we are needing that testosterone to convert into estrogen. So yes, testosterone's starting to decline, but it sticks around a lot longer. We have really robust adrenal production of testosterone into our aging that we don't have for the estrogen and progesterone. DHEA, which is a precursor to testosterone, has kind of a vitality impact on women's lives. That can drop a little bit sooner, and women can palpably feel that. But ultimately, their primary objective should be focusing on the loss of their estrogen and progesterone.
What does that typically feel like? How does it most commonly manifest for women? Are there certain things that are quite common in terms of how it shows up?
Yeah, for a lot of women, it'll start as a cycle change, right? They'll either have shortened cycles or longer cycles. They'll have lighter cycles or heavier cycles. Everyone's different. Some people kind of have all of the above over an arc of transition. The hard thing is, girls today are staying on birth control a lot longer. So they really are not having a natural cycle. They're not able to identify these changes just based on cycle. Women are being given ablations, so they don't bleed any longer, even though they still have their uterus and ovaries. And then a lot of women are using IUDs, which of course are also going to short circuit the cycle. So that piece of focusing on cycle changes can be a difficult benchmark for some women because it's not relevant. Then we have, the mood changes. So a lot of women start to feel very foggy brain, start to feel not like themselves. Maybe they develop anxiety if they never had it before, or their anxiety worsens if they came into this phase with anxiety. Sleep disruption is very common because progesterone does enter into particularly our sleep onset. But as estrogen drops, we have sleep architecture changes as well. So women are waking up at 3 a.m. or they're having more light sleep. Moodiness is definitely a thing. The hot flashes are very commonly held out as, oh, you're in menopause, you're in perimenopause. Well, Maria and I didn't have hot flashes. So if we had used that as a benchmark to identify our hormone loss, we would have failed. But then, you see everything from skin changes, hair changes, vaginal changes, lubrication, libido, all of these things are happening. And the other big thing is a lot of changes in our body composition. We're shifting kind of away from fast twitch to slow twitch muscles. I was a super competitive athlete. I did a lot of sprint racing and boats. And then all of a sudden I was like, wow, I really like these longer endurance races. Well, there was a reason for that. And then we also see our, estrogen is dependent, or I should say our insulin is dependent on estrogen for signaling where to deposit fat on the woman's body, right? Normally, when we're younger, we're going to deposit it around our hips and our rear end. As we lose estrogen, our insulin loses its GPS signal. And what it does is it dumps that fat onto the midsection. So a lot of women are like, where the hell did I get this belly out of the blue? What is going on here? Those are the physical and palpable changes, but there's more changes, Maria can kind of cover regarding metabolic health on the inside that's going on.
Fascinating.
Yeah, we become less sensitive to the actions of insulin. So, we adopt a kind of a really mindful approach to carbohydrates. So that's one thing. It's just when we lose estrogen, this is what happens. Not to say we don't eat them, we do, but we just don't. We probably don't eat what we used to eat in terms of carbohydrate load. And so then you've got changes to the endothelial lining of blood vessels. Nobody sees this. Nobody feels this. You've got, bone remodeling changes going on. Again, not really something that's felt. A really, really interesting thing that is very much felt, but not associated, nobody makes this connection, is joints, ligaments, tendons, lots of aches there. I just look back, I had frozen shoulder really bad, late 40s. And it wasn't until my brother, who's a doctor of physical therapy, said, oh yeah, he's like, really 95% of the women in my clinic who have frozen shoulder are postmenopausal women. That was like light bulb. I was in my research phase and I go and I look and I'm like, oh my God, it's estrogen deficiency. And so it wasn't until I did some physical therapy, some chiropractic, got some relief, was never fully relieved of the pain, didn't think I would ever be able to do a push-up again. Wasn't until I got estrogen on board that, it was like, 100% gone. I still have to watch form and be careful, but it's just amazing. And, the orthopedist and, even my brother, he made the connection that it was menopause. He didn't make the connection that it was estrogen deficient and restoration of that helped. So things like that are also symptoms. The symptoms can range even to things like burning mouth. Pretty rare, but we've run across women who have that. So again, these are all cellular and metabolic changes happening that have zero to do with fertility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Gut microbiome is another one. Tau proteins in the brain, being able to clear those, losing your LDL receptors in the liver. Women, what woman really knows that we have estrogen receptors that line the liver and that are responsible for maintaining our LDL receptors? So suddenly they see their cholesterol going up. And I think as we age, we've all been led to believe that this is just part of aging and you're going to need a statin eventually or whatever. That's not true. We can essentially hold on to our really good cholesterol metabolism if we hold on to our hormones.